At the EU-Africa Summit in Brussels, when leaders from exactly 27 European countries and 12 African heads of state gathered, no one could have predicted how that day would end. When it was Burkina Faso President Ibrahim Traoré's turn to speak, the hall fell into respectful silence. Traoré walked to the podium, looked at his speaking notes, and suddenly turned off the microphone in front of him and left the hall. As all cameras followed him in astonishment, diplomats whispered anxiously. What had happened? Behind the scenes, a single sentence uttered by the French representative had triggered a crisis that would change not only Traoré's diplomatic career, but all Africa-Europe relations. In the grand hall of the Brussels Conference Center, diplomatic tension was almost palpable. It was the third day of the EU-Africa Summit, and agenda items were becoming increasingly sensitive. Trade agreements, migration crisis, security cooperation, and the future control of Africa's natural resources. Ibrahim Traoré sat at the front of the Burkina Faso delegation, his eyes focused on European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen at the podium. The Commission President was speaking about the new partnership framework, but her words were vague and suggestive. In this new era, von der Leyen was saying, we see some African countries questioning their traditional ties with Europe. This is a worrying development, Traoré whispered to Foreign Minister Ouedraogo sitting next to him. What traditional ties is she talking about? Colonialism? Ouedraogo gave him a warning look. This kind of comment was dangerous during an open, diplomatic session. Von der Leyen continued her speech. Some countries' engagement in negotiations with terrorist organizations threatens regional stability. In this situation, as the European Union, we may need to be more selective in providing support. Now Traoré's attention was completely focused on the podium. Negotiations with terrorist organizations? This was clearly a reference to him, to his peace talks with JNIM. Particularly, von der Leyen continued, leaders with questionable records on democracy and human rights. This point was also very clear. Traoré's rise to power through military coup was being implied, but the real bomb exploded when von der Leyen had finished her speech and was stepping down from the podium, and French President Emmanuel Macron stood up. President von der Leyen, Macron said, approaching the microphone, I want to complete your speech. Regarding African leaders who negotiate with terrorist organizations, we have concrete evidence. Traoré tensed. What did this mean? Particularly, Macron continued, looking directly at Traoré. Leaders who conduct meetings with JNIM and Al-Qaeda-affiliated groups are actually increasing the legitimacy of these organizations, and this is unacceptable. The hall fell into icy silence. All eyes turned to Traoré. The Burkina Faso leader sat motionless in his seat with no expression on his face. Macron intensified his words. Moreover, some leaders are actually making secret deals with these groups and in return are leaving control of certain regions to them. This is supporting terrorism. Now the accusation was open and clear. Macron was accusing Traoré of collaborating with terrorist organizations. Traoré slowly stood up. The hall fell completely silent. No one was even breathing. This was a significant moment in diplomatic history, and then something unexpected happened. Traoré said nothing. He walked to the podium, pressed the microphone button on the table, then suddenly turned the button off again and left the hall. Behind him, the entire Burkina Faso delegation stood up and followed him. The hall erupted into complete chaos. Journalists whispered excitedly. Diplomats looked at each other in astonishment. Von der Leyen's face had turned pale. Macron was uneasy. Had he expected this reaction? But no one knew the real truth. In Traoré's briefcase was a confidential document that had been delivered by special courier that morning. This document contained details of secret operations carried out by French intelligence services in Burkina Faso over the past 5 years. And the most shocking part was evidence showing that these operations had actually fueled terrorist attacks in the country. Outside the conference center, Ibrahim Traore and his team were walking toward waiting limousines. International media representatives were running to catch up with them. President Traoré, will you comment? Why did you leave the hall? What is your response to President Macron's accusations? Traoré didn't stop, but before getting into the limousine, he turned and said a single sentence. The truth will come out very soon. As the limousine moved, Traoré took out his cell phone and dialed a number. Sarah? It's Ibrahim. Yes, green light for the operation. Yes, release all documents to the press. Now, Burkina Faso Foreign Minister Ouedraogo looked on with concern. President, this is very risky. We'll completely burn bridges with France. Bridges? Said Traoré with a steel glint in his eyes. What bridges? The bridges where they exploit us? The bridges where they conduct secret operations in our country? Edo. That moment, Traoré's phone rang. The contact showed WikiLeaks' Julian Kovac. Kovac? All set? Asked Traoré. As he listened to the voice on the phone, his face tensed. I understand, very good. The whole world will see in 2 hours. After hanging up, he turned to Ouedraogo. The documents have reached WikiLeaks. In 2 hours, major news sites around the world will publish simultaneously. What kind of documents? Asked Ouedraogo, his concern growing. Operation Savannah, said Traoré. Secret operations conducted by French intelligence services in our country since 2019. Fake terrorist attacks, efforts to radicalize local groups, and most importantly, psychological operations designed to influence elections. Ouedraogo held his breath. Where did these documents come from? Last week, a whistleblower from within French intelligence contacted us. He was suffering from guilt. He could no longer bear the responsibility for innocent people dying in Burkina Faso. The limousine was heading toward the Burkina Faso embassy in Brussels, but the phone kept ringing. The international press wanted an official statement. At that moment, the diplomatic crisis was escalating at the conference center in Brussels. Emmanuel Macron, von der Leyen, and other EU leaders had decided to hold an emergency meeting. This is unacceptable, said Macron, pacing in the meeting room. An African leader cannot leave a European Union summit. This is disrespectful. However, said German Chancellor Olaf Scholz carefully, does Traoré's reaction show that your accusations are correct, or is he hiding something else? Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni interjected, maybe we were too harsh. Traoré's negotiations with terrorist groups in his country were actually attempts to achieve peace. Peace? Macron snapped. Can there be peace with Al-Qaeda-affiliated groups? This is naivety. Just then, von der Leyen's assistant rushed in, holding a tablet. Madam, urgent. WikiLeaks just published a major document about France. Von der Leyen took the tablet and began reading. Her face grew paler and paler. What is it? Asked Macron, disturbed. Von der Leyen handed him the tablet. It took Macron a few seconds to see what he was reading. Then he lost color. This must be fake, he muttered. But when other leaders also looked at the tablet, the seriousness of the situation became clear. The documents on WikiLeaks detailed the French intelligence services project codenamed Operation Savannah. The project summary was as follows. Between 2019-2024, to destabilize Burkina Faso politically, undermine the public's trust in the current government, and ensure a pro-France administration came to power. Methods included fake terrorist attacks, radicalizing local groups, media manipulation, and election interference. The most shocking document showed that French agents had supplied weapons to local militias and encouraged them to attack civilians. God, whispered Scholz. If this is true, fake, shouted Macron. This must be Russian disinformation. However, von der Leyen continued examining the tablet. Emmanuel, these documents are very detailed, and some names, these are real French intelligence officers. A heavy silence fell over the room. Now I understand, said Italian Prime Minister Meloni slowly. Why Traoré left the hall. He knew about the existence of these documents. Von der Leyen's assistant entered the room again. Madam, the international press wants your comment on the summit. CNN, BBC, France 24, they're all broadcasting live. Von der Leyen looked at Macron. The French president's face was pale. "What are we going to say?" she asked. At the Burkina Faso embassy, Ibrahim Traore was preparing for a hastily convened press conference. In the main hall, dozens of journalists from the world press were waiting. When Traoré entered the hall, cameras focused on him. His face showed a calm but determined expression. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I'm here to make a statement about what happened at the EU-Africa summit this morning." The hall fell silent. "President Macron accused me of collaborating with terrorist organizations. This accusation is both false and hypocritical." A hand was raised. "President Traoré, why did you say hypocritical?" "Because," said Traoré, "real terrorist activities are being organized by France's secret services." The hall erupted. Journalists excitedly took notes. The documents just leaked to WikiLeaks exposed the French intelligence services project called Operation Savannah. Under this project, fake terrorist attacks were organized in our country, innocent civilians were killed, and our people were terrorized. Another journalist, "Can you prove these claims?" Traoré pulled out a flash drive from his pocket. "I have footage of French agents, audio recordings, and official documents. I will share these with international media this evening." A voice from the hall. "Has there been a response from France?" "Not yet," said Traoré. "But I'm waiting. Because President Macron has a lot to explain to world public opinion." At that moment, an urgent message came to Traoré's phone. He looked at the screen and smiled slightly. He told the journalists, "received a message from German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. Germany is proposing to establish an independent commission to investigate these allegations." Another journalist, "What was the EU's reaction?" EU Commission President von der Leyen announced they would investigate the incidents. "But this is not enough. We want a full, independent investigation." At the end of the press conference, Traoré made one final statement. "The aim here is not to be hostile to France. The aim is to reveal the truth. African countries have the right to self-determination, and no power can take this right away from us through secret operations." In Paris, the Élysée Palace was trying to manage the crisis. President Macron was holding an emergency advisors meeting. "How serious is the situation?" he asked. Intelligence Chief Jean-Claude Bonner put his hand to his forehead. "Very serious, Mr. President. The leaked documents are real. Operation Savannah was conducted for 5 years. And now? Now, international public opinion expects an explanation from us. If we try to deny it, more documents might leak." Foreign Minister Catherine Moreau interjected, "Our only option is damage control. We can say the operation's purpose was to ensure stability in Burkina Faso." "How will we explain the deaths of innocent civilians?" asked Macron. Silence in the room. "Also," added Bonner, "Traoré might have more documents. This could just be the beginning." Macron slammed the table. "How did this leak? How did security become so weak?" "Probably an inside leak," said Bonner. "Someone might be suffering from guilt." At that moment, Macron's private phone rang. He looked at the screen. Angela Merkel, personal line. "Angela?" After a brief conversation with the voice on the phone, he hung up. "What did she say?" asked Moreau. "Germany wants to establish an independent commission to investigate the situation, and other EU members are also supporting it." Everyone in the room knew what this meant. France was being isolated by the rest of Europe. "What are our options?" asked Macron. Bonner took a deep breath. "Two options. First, deny everything and risk a diplomatic crisis. Second, be open. Admit our mistakes and turn a new page with Burkina Faso." Macron thought for a long time. Then he picked up the phone. "Who are you going to call?" asked Moreau. "Ibrahim Traore," said Macron. "To resolve this crisis, I need to speak directly with him." The next day, something the world never expected happened. President Macron apologized on behalf of France in a live television broadcast. "On behalf of the French Republic," he said, "I apologize to the people of Burkina Faso. The operations conducted by our intelligence services were unacceptable and wrong. We accept responsibility for the deaths of innocent people. The world was shocked. A European leader was admitting to secret operations in Africa and apologizing. From now on, Macron continued, France-Burkina Faso relations will be based on new foundations. Foundations of respect, equality, and transparency. An hour later, Ibrahim Traore also spoke live from Ouagadougou. I appreciate President Macron's courage, he said. Admitting the truth is not easy. This could be a new beginning. But then he added, but apology is not enough. Compensation must be paid for innocent people who lost their lives, and guarantees must be given that such operations will not be repeated in the future. 3 months later, a new EU-Africa summit was held in Brussels. This time, the atmosphere was completely different. When Ibrahim Traore took the podium, he received respectful but genuine applause. 3 months ago, he began, I had left this hall because it was time to tell the truth. Today, I'm happy to be here because now we can speak as equals. In his speech, he emphasized that a new era had begun in Africa-Europe relations. He said the colonial period was closing, and a partnership based on mutual respect and benefit was beginning. The most striking part was this: truth sometimes hurts, but only when we face the truth can real peace and partnership be possible. At the end of his speech, Emmanuel Macron stood up and began applauding. Then all other leaders followed him. This was not just a diplomatic gesture. It was also a sign that Africa was now accepted as an equal partner. After the summit, Macron and Traoré had a private meeting. I owe you something, said Macron. Your courage forced me to be brave too. You don't owe anything, said Traoré. Just in the future, look at African countries differently. We are not colonies. We are your partners. The two leaders shook hands. This handshake was the beginning of a new era, not just between two people, but between two continents. As Traoré was leaving Brussels, a journalist asked one final question. President Traoré, what was the most important lesson of this crisis? Traoré thought for a moment. Truth always comes out, he said. And courage sometimes begins with leaving the room. These words were not just a summary of that moment, but of Africa's new stance. They would no longer remain silent. They were now equal partners. And it all began with Ibrahim Traoré having the courage to turn off the microphone at the podium and leave the hall.